I never knew how much a door could hurt until that moment. The heavy oak door slammed shut behind me, and the sound echoed like a gunshot through the hollow space in my chest. I stood on the porch, frozen in place, clutching the handle of my worn suitcase. Rain was pouring in sheets, drenching me almost instantly, but I barely felt it. The cold was numbing, a bitter contrast to the warmth that used to fill that house. For a moment, I couldn't move. I just stared at the door, hoping, no, begging it to open again. My hands trembled, not from the chill, but from the shock. I felt like I had been struck, the pain blooming slowly from my core, spreading outward until it reached my fingertips. Through the stained glass window, I caught a glimpse of Martha's face, my mother-in-law. Her lips were curled in a triumphant smirk, her eyes hard and pitiless. I had seen that look before, always directed at someone else. It had never occurred to me that one day I would be on the receiving end. A sob escaped my throat, but I swallowed it down. I wouldn't give her that satisfaction. I wouldn't show how much she had broken me. I lifted my chin, straightened my shoulders, and tried to remember how to breathe. The rain soaked through my coat, my hair plastered to my face, and I could feel my mascara running. I must have looked pitiful, like some tragic figure from a novel. It almost made me laugh, but the sound died before it could reach my lips. I glanced down at my left hand, where my wedding ring glinted dully in the dim light. It felt heavy, like a shackle. My stomach twisted with nausea as I realized the symbolism. I had clung to it for comfort since Michael died, convinced that as long as I wore it, I still belonged. I still mattered. I was still his wife. But that door proved otherwise. Martha's hateful glare proved otherwise. I was nothing but an inconvenience, a burden to be discarded now that Michael wasn't there to protect me. Slowly, I lowered my hand and wiped the wetness from my cheeks. I couldn't tell anymore if it was rain or tears. I took a step backward, the heel of my boot catching on the cracked stone of the porch. I stumbled but caught myself and looked up at the windows, hoping to see some sign of mercy, some hint that I wasn't entirely alone. The curtains moved, just a fraction, and I thought I saw someone peeking out. Maybe Robert, Michael's brother, maybe one of the nieces. But no one came to open the door. No one came to help. It was over. I had no home here anymore. A shiver racked my body, and I bit my lip hard enough to taste blood. I couldn't stay. I couldn't keep hoping that someone inside would change their mind. They had decided. I wasn't family. I wasn't wanted. Forced myself to move, one step at a time down the slick stone steps, the suitcase thumping against my leg. I didn't know where I was going. I didn't even have enough cash to book a motel room. All I knew was that I couldn't stand there anymore, begging for scraps of love and kindness from people who never truly accepted me. I looked back once, just once, at the house that had once been filled with laughter and love. The house where I had been Michael's wife. My reflection stared back at me from the rain-soaked pavement, distorted, broken. I pulled my coat tighter around me and walked into the night, leaving behind the life I thought I would have forever. The rain washed away my footprints almost instantly, as if I had never been there at all. As I reached the end of the long driveway, I felt the weight of the ring again. I couldn't bear it any longer. I pulled it off and held it in my palm, staring at the simple gold band. With a shaky breath, I whispered, "Goodbye, Michael," and slipped it into my pocket. The world felt vast and empty as I walked down the dark, unfamiliar road. My heart ached with every step, but I knew one thing. I couldn't go back. I had to find a way to survive on my own. The sky cracked with thunder, and I glanced up, letting the rain wash over my face. In that moment, something shifted inside me. Maybe it was the realization that I had nothing left to lose. Maybe it was the thought that I had to be stronger now. For myself. Because no one else would be. I took a deep breath, clenched my hands around the suitcase handle, and kept walking. I suppose the beginning always seems brighter in memory, softened by time, smoothed out by longing. I remember the first time I saw Michael. It was a crisp autumn afternoon, the leaves just starting to blush red and gold. He was sitting on the stone ledge of the college courtyard, sleeves rolled up, glasses perched on his nose as he scribbled in a notebook. I don't remember what he was writing, only the way he looked up and smiled, like I was someone worth noticing. Someone worth knowing. He asked me to join him for coffee that same afternoon, and by the time the sun had set, I was already half in love. He was magnetic, charming in a way that felt effortless, his laugh easy, his eyes sharp and attentive. I was swept away, completely and utterly. We fell fast, the way you do when you're young and everything feels possible. I was an aspiring artist back then, painting murals and sketching faces in my free time. He used to call me his dreamer, said that I had the soul of a poet. Looking back, I wonder if I was too willing to hand him those parts of me. I remember how he would sometimes joke about my little paintings, not paying the bills. And I would laugh along with him, even though it stung just a little. He had bigger plans that didn't involve paintbrushes and gallery walls. His family owned a real estate firm, a sprawling business with a name that was practically stitched into the city's architecture. When he asked me to marry him, I said yes without hesitation, believing his promises of forever. I traded my canvases for ledgers and luncheon dates, learning to navigate his world of boardroom meetings and charity galas. The family estate became my sanctuary, a towering stone mansion with gardens that stretched as far as the eye could see. I poured myself into it, planting roses along the walkways, tending to the vegetable patches out back. I wallpapered the rooms with warmth and laughter, filled it with the scent of fresh bread and lavender oil. I thought if I loved the house enough, if I nurtured its walls and made it my own, his family would see me as part of it too. But I was wrong. Martha, his mother, never missed an opportunity to remind me that I wasn't one of them. I was the outsider, the girl who came from humble beginnings. I remember overhearing her once at a dinner party, whispering to a friend, "It's sweet how she tries so hard. Almost makes you forget where she came from." I had smiled through. It pretended not to hear, but the words festered. Michael brushed it off when I mentioned it, said I was being too sensitive. I wanted so desperately to believe him, so I swallowed the hurt, tucked it away with all the other small cruelties, and kept going. The whispers grew louder after our second anniversary. I would walk into rooms and conversation would hush. Glances would be exchanged, pitying smiles cast my way. I blamed it on my own insecurities, convinced myself that I was imagining things. But I wasn't. I saw the way Martha watched me when I handled the finances for the estate, her gaze sharp and calculating. I caught Michael on phone calls that ended abruptly when I entered the room. He'd brush off my questions, pull me close, kiss me on the forehead, and tell me I worried too much. His hands were always cold. I remember that now. Michael fell ill a few months later. It started with fatigue, brushed off as stress, long hours at the office. Then the coughing, the weight loss, the nights I found him shivering beneath layers of blankets. I held his hand through every appointment, sat with him during every treatment. His family was always there, hovering like shadows, watching. Martha's eyes grew sharper, colder. When Michael finally slipped away, I felt like I had been hollowed out, emptied and left raw. But I held on. I held on because I believed, foolishly, that his family would stand by me. I can still see the funeral in flashes. Black veils, hushed whispers, hands squeezing mine that felt more like obligation than comfort. Martha's gaze lingered on me. That day, colder than I'd ever seen it. I thought it was grief. I was wrong. It was calculation. I didn't know it then, but plans were already in motion. My fate had been decided before the soil had even settled over his grave. I tried to cling to the life we built, convinced that I still belonged, that his name still mattered. I held the ring close, twisting it around my finger like a talisman, whispering promises I knew he couldn't hear. I didn't want to see the truth. I didn't want to believe that I had only been a placeholder, a tenant in his life, never truly part of the family, just an accessory to his ambition. But the shadows had always been there, lingering just beyond the light. I just hadn't wanted to look. The morning I tried to access the joint account, I was sitting in a cafe just outside of town. The waitress had given me a look of pity as she poured me another cup of lukewarm coffee. No cream, no sugar, just black and bitter. I could still feel the rain from the night before seeping into my bones, the dampness clinging to my clothes like a second skin. My fingers were still raw from clutching that suitcase all night. I'd slept in my car, the leather seats stiff and unforgiving. I didn't sleep, not really. I just stared at the ceiling, listening to the rain drum against the windshield, counting the drops until dawn finally broke. I wrapped my hands around the warm mug, letting the heat chase away the numbness. My laptop sat open in front of me, the screen bright and harsh against my tired eyes. I typed in the login details with slow, deliberate movements. My breath held, tight in my chest. The cursor spun for a moment, just a second or two, and then the numbers popped up. 0. I stared at the screen, unblinking. 0. I refreshed the page. Still 0. The breath I'd been holding escaped in a ragged, broken sound that drew the eyes of a couple at the next table. I turned away, cheeks burning. No, I whispered, the word slipping out before I could catch it. My hands moved faster, clicking through tabs, searching for the savings account, the emergency fund, the business dividends. One by one, they loaded, each revealing the same empty wasteland of numbers. 0, 0, 0. My fingers went numb against the keys, and I slowly lowered the screen. I couldn't breathe. My eyes darted around the cafe, catching glimpses of strangers in casual conversation, unaware that the floor had just fallen out from under me. I felt like I was drowning, gasping for air in a room full of it. I fumbled for my phone, dialing Michael's lawyer, the one who had handled his estate. His assistant picked up on the third ring, her voice crisp and detached. Hello, yes. I'm trying to get some information about my husband's accounts. There seems to be some mistake. I could hear the desperation in my own voice. I hated it. There was a pause on the other end. I'm sorry, Mrs. Langston. I was instructed by the family to inform you that all assets have been transferred in accordance with the terms of the will. The words were clipped, practiced. She had rehearsed this. My mind spun. Transferred? To who? Another pause. To the Langston Trust. It's been handled privately. I suggest you contact them directly if you have further questions. Click. The line went dead. I set the phone down carefully, almost reverently, as if it might shatter beneath my touch. My hand shook, and I wrapped my fingers tighter around the mug, as if it could anchor me to reality. I couldn't cry. Not here. Not in front of these strangers. I forced the tears back, swallowing them down like shards of glass. I closed the laptop and left a crumpled $5 bill on the counter as I walked out. The waitress watched me go, her eyes soft with pity. I couldn't look at her. I couldn't look at anyone. The next few days were a blur of locked doors and unanswered calls. I tried the family estate. Martha wouldn't even let me pass the gate. The guard, a man I'd known for years, wouldn't meet my eyes as he shook his head and muttered, I'm sorry, Mrs. Langston, I just can't. I slept in the car that night, parked under the shadow of a sycamore tree at the edge of town. I had only my suitcase, a few changes of clothes, and a box of photographs I couldn't bring myself to leave behind. The wedding ring was still on, my finger, heavy and cold, a mockery of promises that no longer mattered. I stared at it in the darkness, twisting it around and around until the skin beneath it grew raw. I reached out to friends, people who had danced at my wedding, toasted to our happiness. Their voices were strained, their excuses flimsy. They couldn't be seen with me. Not now. Not after everything. Michael's family was powerful, deeply rooted in the city's veins. Crossing them meant consequences, and no one was willing to take that risk. Days turned into weeks. My world shrank down to the back seat of my car, the gas station bathrooms where I washed up, the same 3 outfits rotating in an endless cycle. I held onto that box of photographs like it was the last thread tethering me to my past life. I would pull out the pictures sometimes. Me and Michael smiling at a party, standing in front of the estate, holding hands in the garden. I would trace his face with my fingertips, memorizing the curve of his smile, the light in his eyes. One night, parked in an abandoned lot with only the glow of a streetlight to keep me company, I pulled out the framed wedding photo I kept in, my purse. It was cracked at the corner, the glass chipped from years of moving it from room to room. I stared at it, my reflection bleeding into the image. I looked happy. So damn happy. How could I have been so blind? A scream clawed its way out of my throat before I could stop it. It was raw, primal, a sound I didn't know I was capable of making. I slammed the frame against the steering wheel once, then again, the glass shattering with a sharp, wicked crack. I didn't stop until it was in pieces, until I could barely make out our faces through the fractured glass. I sat there, breathless and shaking, shards of glass cutting into my palms. And that's when it happened. Something shifted. A tiny flicker of something sharp and dangerous sparked to life in the hollow of my chest. It wasn't hope. Not yet. But it was something like it. A refusal to stay broken. A refusal to stay small. I wrapped my hand in an old t-shirt from the back seat, ignoring the sting of the cuts. My hands were bleeding, but I didn't care. I stared at the shattered frame, the splintered wood, the broken glass, and I made a promise to myself. They had taken everything from me. But I wasn't done. Not yet. I leaned back in the driver's seat, the broken pieces of my life scattered around me. I closed my eyes, and for the first time in weeks, I felt something other than despair. I felt anger, righteous and pure, burning in my veins. I would get it back. All of it. One step at a time. The city shrank in my rearview mirror, its towering skyline swallowed up by fog and distance. I gripped the wheel tighter, my knuckles white and raw. Each mile I put between me and that place felt like air being siphoned back into my lungs. I drove with the windows down, letting the wind whip my hair back, chasing away the scent of old memories that clung to me like stale perfume. I didn't stop until I saw the ocean. It stretched out before me, vast and indifferent, crashing against the rocks with a power that made me feel small in the best way possible. I parked on the edge of a cliffside road and just sat there, listening to the waves roar and smash. They didn't care who I was or what I had lost. They simply were. That's when I decided I wouldn't go back. I couldn't. There was nothing left for me there. Just ghosts and empty rooms and whispers that would never fade. So, I followed the coastline south, winding through sleepy towns with cobblestone streets and colorful storefronts. It felt like slipping into the pages of a novel, surreal and untouched. I found the studio apartment purely by chance. It was above a flower shop called Petals and Pollen, nestled between a bakery that smelled of cinnamon and a used bookstore with crooked shelves. The apartment was tiny, barely more than a single room with cracked windows and water-stained ceilings. But it was mine. For the first time in months, I turned the key in a door and felt like I was coming home. The landlord was an elderly woman named Margaret, with wiry gray hair tied back in a loose bun and eyes like shards of sea glass, sharp but warm. She didn't ask questions when I handed her the deposit, just nodded approvingly and pressed the key into my hand with fingers that were knotted with age but steady. "Place is yours," she said simply, her voice husky from years of cigarettes. "You break it, you fix it. I'm too old to be climbing ladders." I almost laughed, the sound startling in my own ears. Deal. It didn't take long for routine to settle in. Mornings began with fresh coffee. Real coffee, not the powdered stuff I had been surviving on for weeks. I would sit by the single window that looked out over the main street, listening to the world wake up. Shopkeepers unlocked doors. Locals wandered in for their morning paper, and the scent of freshly baked bread would drift up from the bakery next door. It wasn't glamorous, but it was real, and for the first time in a long while, it was enough. Margaret would stop by every so often, mostly under the guise of needing a young set of legs to reach the top shelves in the flower shop. I never minded. There was something about the way she spoke, brusque but unyieldingly kind, that made me feel safe. She started offering me work at the shop. Small things at first. Watering plants, sweeping the front steps. Before long, I was working the counter, learning the names of regulars and the art of binding bouquets with twine. The flower shop became my haven. I found peace in the simplicity of pruning stems and arranging petals, the scent of lavender and eucalyptus clinging to my clothes long after I'd left. I would breathe it in as I walked up the narrow stairs to my apartment, feeling something soften inside me that I thought had hardened for good. One afternoon, while tying together a bouquet of sunflowers and baby's breath, Margaret handed me a notebook, its leather cover worn and soft. "Every woman needs a place to put her thoughts," she said gruffly, setting it down beside me. "Can't keep them all up here." She tapped the side of her head. I stared at the notebook for a long time after she left, running my fingers over the edges. Eventually, I opened it, the pages whispering against my fingertips, blank and inviting. I wrote my name on the first page, just to see it there, bold and real. Claire Langston. My handwriting looked foreign to me, but it was mine. I filled the first page that night, my thoughts tumbling out like water from a broken dam. I wrote about Michael, about the estate, about Martha's eyes, cold and calculating. I wrote about the rain, the feeling of standing on the porch with nothing but a suitcase and a broken heart. I wrote until my hand cramped, and then I wrote some more. I found healing in those pages, a slow unraveling of the knots that had tangled around my heart. Every entry became a tiny act of rebellion, a testament to the fact that I was still here. I still mattered. Margaret would sit with me sometimes. In the shop, her hands busy with stems and ribbons, her voice low and scratchy as she spoke of her late husband, of raising children alone, of running the shop for 40 years without a single sick day. "Life knocks you down, kid," she would say, tying off a bundle of roses. "But it's up to you if you stay there." I would nod, biting back tears. I was still learning how to stand. As the weeks passed, I stopped looking back. I no longer checked my phone for messages that wouldn't come, no longer haunted the idea of what could have been. The flower shop, the studio apartment, the view of the ocean. They were mine now, stitched together with threads of routine and resilience. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't even close. But it was enough. For now, it was enough. I had no idea then that it was only the beginning, that the seeds of my rebirth had been planted, and that one day I would rise from those ashes stronger than I had ever been. But for now, I breathed in the scent of flowers and fresh sea air, and I let the wounds begin to heal. The letter arrived on a Tuesday, folded neatly and tucked inside a cream-colored envelope with a gold-embossed seal. I found it waiting in my mailbox alongside the usual clutter: grocery store flyers, a gardening catalog, and a handwritten note from Margaret about fresh lavender cuttings. The envelope stood out starkly, pristine and imposing, with the Langston family crest pressed into the wax. I stared at it for a long moment, my hands still stained with soil from the morning's planting. My breath snagged in my throat. I hadn't heard from them since that day on the porch, since the door had slammed shut and my life had unraveled. My fingers shook as I tore it open, the paper slicing easily against the blade of my thumb. I barely felt the sting. Inside was an invitation, written in elaborate cursive, inviting me to the annual Langston Gala, a spectacle of wealth and pretense held every year at the estate. I traced the words with my fingertips, feeling the weight of them settle in my chest. At the bottom of the letter was Martha's signature, bold and unapologetic. My stomach twisted. This wasn't kindness. It was a summons, a spectacle of power and exclusion. But that wasn't all. Tucked inside was a folded legal notice, thick and heavy. My heart lurched as I unfolded it, the print sharp and accusing. It was an official document declaring my removal from any inheritance rights associated with Michael's estate. His accounts, the properties, the business dividends, erased with a flick of a pen and the weight of a name that wasn't mine. I stared at it for what felt like hours, my hands going numb. I expected the grief to follow, the crushing sense of loss that had lingered like a shadow since his death. But it didn't come. Instead, I felt something else, something hot and sharp that blazed in my chest like a live wire. It wasn't sadness, it was anger. For the first time, I saw it clearly. The deception, the manipulation, the lies threaded through every conversation I'd had with Martha, every strained smile at the estate, every hushed whisper at family gatherings. I saw it all with a clarity that burned away the fog of grief. I felt it rise in me like a tidal wave, unstoppable and unyielding. I wasn't going to be erased. Not like this. I folded the letter back up, tucking it into the envelope with deliberate care. I locked the door to my tiny apartment and sat down. At the table, my fingers brushing over the leather-bound journal Margaret had given me. I flipped it open to a blank page and wrote 2 words at the top. Take everything. I spent the next few days digging. I combed through old paperwork, receipts I'd stuffed in shoeboxes, bank statements I had printed and forgotten. The more I uncovered, the deeper the corruption went. Transfers made in Michael's name after he had died, signatures that didn't match his, accounts I had never even heard of. I could feel the weight of it in my bones, their greed, their arrogance. It was all there, hidden in the ink of bank transfers and land deeds. I knew I couldn't do it alone. I needed someone who understood the world of law and power better than I did. Margaret was the one who suggested him, an old friend of her late husband's, a lawyer with a reputation for taking on the wealthy and winning. His name was Samuel Brooks, and he didn't bother with handshakes or small talk. He just leaned back in his chair, his eyes sharp behind wire-rimmed glasses, and listened as I spilled everything. When I finished, he sat forward, lacing his fingers together. "They think you're finished," he said, his voice calm and steady. "They think you're broken." He smiled then, a thin line that stretched across his face. "That's their mistake." We worked for weeks. Samuel helped me sift through the documents, cross-referencing names, pointing out discrepancies. He taught me how to read the fine print, how to understand the language of contracts and loopholes. I learned fast, driven by something sharper than revenge. It was justice. It was survival. Margaret watched me work with quiet approval, slipping me cups of tea and sandwiches when I forgot to eat. Sometimes she would sit with me in the evenings, her hands busy with knitting as I combed through stacks of paperwork. "They always underestimate us," she would say, her needles clicking rhythmically. "They think just because we don't wear their suits or have their money, we don't understand." She paused, her eyes glimmering with something fierce. "But we understand plenty." I took her words to heart. I reached out to old friends, cautiously and quietly, listening for whispers of Langston family secrets. It didn't take much, just a few phone calls, a lunch with an old college friend who still worked in city planning, a dinner with an ex-employee who'd been ousted when Martha took over. I pieced the stories together, mapping out the deceit like lines on a blueprint. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, I felt powerful. I wasn't running anymore. I wasn't hiding. I was building something real, something that would matter. Every signature, every slip of paper, every whispered secret became a brick in the foundation of my reckoning. The invitation to the gala sat on my dresser, untouched and waiting. I would be there, but not as a victim, not as the discarded widow. I would walk through those doors with my head held high, armed not just with hope, but with proof. As the day crept closer, I found myself standing before the mirror, examining the woman who stared back at me. There were lines around my eyes I hadn't seen before, streaks of silver threading through my hair. But there was strength too, etched into the hard line of my jaw, the set of my shoulders. I reached for the ring I still kept in my dresser drawer, holding it in my palm. It wasn't a symbol of love anymore. It was a promise. To myself, I slipped it back into its box and locked it away, the key cold in my hand. It was time to rebuild. It was time to take back what was mine. And I would. One step at a time. The night of the gala arrived wrapped in a shroud of mist, the fog rolling in from the ocean like ghostly fingers stretching across the coastline. I stood in front of the mirror, my hands smoothing the fabric of the midnight blue dress Margaret had helped me pick out. It was simple, elegant, the kind of dress that spoke of quiet power. I ran my fingers over the pearls at my throat, a gift from Margaret, and took a deep breath. I had come so far from that broken woman standing in the rain, clutching a suitcase with nowhere to go. Tonight, I wasn't running. Tonight, I was walking back through those doors on my own terms. I slipped the ring from its velvet box, holding it in my palm one last time. Its weight felt different now. Not a shackle, but a reminder of promises made and broken. I slid it onto my finger, the cold metal settling against my skin like an exhale. It was time. Margaret was waiting outside, in her old sedan, the headlights cutting through the fog as I climbed in. "You ready for this?" she asked, her voice as steady as her hands on the wheel. I looked at her, really looked at her, the lines of her face etched with decades of strength, the fire still burning in her eyes. She had become more than just my landlord. She had become family. I reached over, squeezed her hand, and nodded. "I'm ready." The estate loomed into view, its stone walls glistening with dew under the light of the street lamps. Cars were already lining the driveway, sleek and polished, their owners dressed in designer suits and glittering gowns. I stepped out, straightened my shoulders, and walked up those marble steps as if I'd never left. The murmurs started almost immediately. Whispers floated through the crowd like embers catching in the wind. I saw heads turn, eyes widen, hands flutter nervously to champagne flutes. I ignored them all, my gaze fixed straight ahead as I entered the grand hall. The chandeliers sparkled above, casting fractured light across the walls. It looked exactly the same, and yet entirely different. Martha stood near the grand staircase, her champagne glass frozen halfway to her lips. Her eyes locked on mine, widening with disbelief before hardening into something colder. She recovered quickly, plastering a smile across her face as she made, her way over. "Well," she drawled, her voice dripping with false warmth. "I must say, I'm surprised to see you here." I returned her smile, just as brittle, just as sharp. "I'm sure you are." Her eyes flickered to my hand, catching sight of the ring I still wore. For just a moment her composure cracked, a shadow of fury crossing her face. "I wasn't aware you were still holding on to that." I raised my hand, the ring glinting under the chandelier light. "Some things are worth holding on to. Some things aren't." Her smile faltered. Before she could reply, a ripple of murmurs spread through the room. I turned to see Samuel walking through the double doors, flanked by two men in suits carrying leather-bound folders. His gaze met mine, and he nodded. It was time. I stepped back, letting him take the floor. His voice carried over the murmurs, smooth and unyielding. "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen," he began, his eyes sweeping the room. "I'm here on behalf of Claire Langston. You may know her as the widow of Michael Langston." More whispers, sharp and hushed. I saw the looks exchanged. Confusion, shock, curiosity. I saw Martha's face tighten, her hands clutching her glass just a bit too tightly. "I've brought with me legal documentation," Samuel continued, lifting a folder and waving it slightly. "Proof of fraudulent activity committed against Mrs. Langston, illegal asset transfers, forged signatures, and fabricated medical documentation." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "We have evidence that key figures within the Langston family manipulated estate holdings and altered legal documents to strip Mrs. Langston of her rightful inheritance." A gasp rippled through the crowd. I watched as faces turned pale, as hands covered open mouths. Martha's glass slipped from her hand, shattering on the marble floor with a sound that echoed through the hall. "That's enough," she hissed, her voice trembling. "This is absurd. Lies. She's a liar." Samuel didn't flinch. He reached into his folder, pulling out a sheaf of papers. "This is a judge's order for an emergency hearing, effective immediately." He handed it to the man standing beside him, who stepped forward and placed it in Martha's shaking hands. "We can settle this here, or we can settle it in court. Your choice." Martha looked around, her eyes wild, searching the faces of those she'd once commanded with just a whisper. But there was no one left to save her. I watched her crumble, piece by piece, the mask she had worn for so long shattering under the weight of truth. Samuel stepped back, nodding to me. I took a deep breath, feeling the eyes of the room on me as I moved forward. My heels clicked against the marble, each step steady, unyielding. I stopped in front of her, meeting her gaze head-on. "You thought you could take everything," I said, my voice low but firm. "You thought I would just disappear." I reached into my purse and pulled out the envelope she had sent me, the invitation, the legal notice. I held it up for her to see. "You shouldn't have sent this. It was your mistake." Her eyes flared with fury. "You think you've won?" She spat. "You think you can just walk in here and—" "I don't think," I interrupted, my voice steady. "I know." I turned to the grand fireplace, the one that had been the centerpiece of every family gathering, every holiday. I slid the ring from my finger, holding it in my palm for a moment, letting the weight of it settle. Then I walked to the marble mantel, setting it down gently. It glinted in the firelight, a sliver of gold against the stone. "It's yours now," I said, turning back to her. "It never really belonged to me anyway." I walked away then, my heels clicking steadily across the floor, the whispers rising, in my wake. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I had taken everything from them, not just money or land, but the illusion of control. They would never recover from this. Outside, the fog had lifted. The stars hung low and bright in the sky, and I breathed in the crisp night air like it was the first breath I'd taken in years. Margaret was waiting at the curb, her eyes glimmering with something like pride. I slid into the passenger seat, closing the door behind me. "You did it," she said simply, her voice thick with emotion. I looked out the window, the estate shrinking behind me, fading into the mist. "Yeah," I whispered, more to myself than to her. "I did." And for the first time in a long while, I felt whole.